it. Going to Chicago.
Well, here we are, taking action on a plan that was hatched on less than 48 hours notice to embark on an 8-hour plus journey to Chicago, Illinois, a city that I had visited in a rush just 6 weeks earlier. But for some reason, its charm and architectural beauty had been calling me back ever since. With that said, I guess this is a part of the video where we can cue intro. Another ZFK Vlogs on the docket. This is last minute Chicago travel content how-to. And in this video, I'm going to show you how I stylize my shots to stand out from the crowd. If you'll please join me, we're gonna head to Chicago. But first stop, Detroit. Once one of the largest cities in America, with great rises and even greater falls in status. Centered in America's Rust Belt, a region characterized by declining industry and population losses. Once a place to be, with great paying jobs and industry, it was the hub of North American-made cars. But times changed, the jobs left, and so did the people. Despite that, it seems Detroit's worst days are in its rearview mirror, and it all still stands here today. It is a home to a plethora of beautiful historical architecture, culture, music, and sports teams. Detroit is a city that actively holds the potential to bounce back, with many revitalization efforts underway. It is a city finding its own way. After a few more additional hours of driving, I finally arrive at a Walmart parking lot on the outskirts of Chicago, where my glorious slumber awaits. Well, I've done a lot of shit in my day, but sleeping in the trunk/car, that's a first. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this may be classified as borderline cheap. Chicago, Chi-Town, the Windy City, whatever you want to call it. It is a city of deep history with an earned notoriety as one of the greatest cities in North America. When I think of Chicago, I think of rich arts culture at the world-famous Art Institute of Chicago. I think of Al Capone and the romanticization of early organized American crime culture. I think of the incredible feats of human ingenuity and innovation allowing Art Deco and steel to touch the sky. I think of all of these things in my head to the tune of Frank Sinatra's Chicago. Chicago was at one time a testing ground for cutting-edge modern architecture, while still hanging in the balance of nature with its excellently well-managed waterfront green spaces. This is a city so big and so bustling that I only managed to see a fraction of what it has to offer in my one day spent here. But if I could tell you one thing for certain, it all happens here in Chicago. Alright, good morning Chicago. First stop, Adler's Planetarium. I'm gonna stop over there for some sunrise pics of the skyline. Let's go check it out. Alright, so we're here at Adler's Planetarium, just on the other side of the camera. Chicago skyline is here. Gorgeous morning, we're here for the sunrise shots. Ideally, you want to know where the sun rises. In this case, it does rise towards the skyline, and what time. You want to be there ahead of time so that you can compose your shot, get it ready for when the sun comes up. Unfortunately, in my situation, Apple Maps has never failed to fail me every time. Brought me right through some traffic. So we're gonna do a couple test shots here, and then we're gonna start working on what other composures we want to do and start doing some time-lapse stuff. We have the whole day to enjoy in Chicago. It is a massive city, I think it's safe to say. It's definitely not going to be possible to capture all that it offers in one day, but I think that over the span of a 12-hour period, I can get quite a bit of what I'd like. So let's do our first couple test shots here. Make sure that we got our exposure and composition done properly. And firstly, I think it's safe to say with any sort of long lens like this, in my case we got a 70-200, which is, as a mentor of mine once told me, the creme de la creme of lenses. I'd have to agree. It's going to have a little bit more shake since it's a long lens. I also have a 1.4 modifier on there, so it actually is even longer than 200mm at its fullest length. So it's safe to say that using a trigger is probably a good idea here to eliminate any shake on the lens. That means we can use a slower shutter speed. And also, for anything that's long distance like this, I recommend using at least f8 to make sure you have a depth of field that is wide enough to get as much detail as you like. So let's see what we got here for some test shots. So one of the great things about telescopic lenses too is it really compresses the foreground and background in a way that which allows you to have large scale architectural buildings like that without any of those wide lens distortions where you're looking up at it and it kind of like does this, or looking down at it and doing the opposite. With it being a telescopic lens, it is so far pushed in that all angles should really come out nice and straight like a professional architectural photo would, and that is why we're using this lens at this particular moment. All right, and lastly at this location, what we want to do is I want to get a nice time lapse of this sunrise here with the clouds and whatnot. What you need for that is either a timer or a built-in intervalometer. In my case with the Canon 5D Mark III, that is not possible, so you have to get an external intervalometer. Some of the things you want to take into consideration is what is your export frame rate going to be? 60, 30, or 24. I've been doing 30 for a long time, which a lot of people are not a big fan of. So it's easy numbers in that case. Every 1 second of footage is going to come out to about 30 frames. So that's how I do my math. If I want a 10-second video, I need 300 frames off of this bad boy. So in which case I will set that up, and then I know roughly how long I'm going to be sitting here waiting for, and I can do other things while I'm waiting for this to finish up. Alright, so we're going to set this up. You should be good to go. Make sure that you have your autofocus turned off, because that can have the camera focusing on a different minute detail from frame to frame, and it's going to mess up your smooth time lapse. So there we go. We're going to let that go. 300 frames every 3 seconds, and we will get a 10-second video out of this. Alright, so first things first, gotta eat. Another tip for full day photography in the city, you want to dress comfortably and for whatever weather you may have to prepare for. In my case, it's not even mid-October and it's freezing in Chicago. So I'm double hoodied up. I've got shorts under my pants and pretty much just stopping for breakfast here to get organized since I didn't have time. This trip is just such a on-the-whim kind of trip, and pretty well. I'm just gonna get this sorted. Got a little map I made here and a bunch of different things I want to mention in the video, locations I want to visit, so that we can make the absolute best of a single day in Chicago and give you the best tips possible for your photography endeavors. Another tip for you too, if you want to look super important and pro, carry the clipboard. Ladies love it. No, they don't. I want to say one more thing before we get started with some more shots here. It's not the gear, it's the creativity and thought behind the shots. So don't worry about having the best gear in the world. Just get out there, practice, repeat, repetition, have some consistency, and your work will get better over time. And another reason why I came here by myself today is because I love traveling with people, except for when I'm out for content. A lot of people get in the way and kind of bog down your process and hold you back. So don't be afraid to solo travel if you want to go get those shots. You're going to have a lot more time to focus in on what you need to do and get what you need to get done. All right, we're going to head over to the Willis Tower for the sky deck and get some cool shots up there with a new vantage point. After a little drive through downtown Chicago and checking into what would become the most expensive parking garage bill of my career, I drive up round and round the windy garage, and I walk down round and round the windy stairwell. Once outside, I use 2 feet and a heartbeat to close the remaining distance to Chicago's tallest freestanding structure. This is Willis Tower, an American icon, freestanding at 1450 feet tall for 50 years strong. Constructed in 1973, the Willis Tower, formerly Sears, has left an impression on Chicago and the world ever since. Willis Tower for many years held the tallest building in the United States status until 2014, marking the opening of the Freedom Tower in New York City. Willis Tower sits both fastened to the hip of Lake Michigan, whilst touching the sky with its impressive and imposing stature. It is a somewhat ominous-looking structure made up of 9 bundled tubes that slowly slip away as the structure gains in height. Passing through the lobby and purchasing Skydeck tickets will lead you through a museum exhibit showcasing the building's history. Next up, you head up a high-speed elevator to the 103rd floor viewing platform, offering unparalleled views of Chicago and a gut-wrenching glass platform to walk out onto. From the 103rd floor, you can see Chicago in all of its glory. Unobstructed views of Chicago's waterfront parks, North and South End, and the photos I was able to collect were all worth every dollar spent for access to the 103rd floor Skydeck experience. And there you have it, Willis Tower Skydeck. Next, in the lobby is panel bracketing. This is for when you can't quite get wide enough. So what you do is you use your autofocus or manual, get your first photo, and then turn auto off and fill in all the edges that you weren't able to get into the frame. Later you go into post, stitch these together, and now you have a bracketed pano. These are great when you can't get wide enough, which is a problem that does happen often. And because you're stitching multiple photos together, you get an even higher resolution file. The next tip to spice up your travel photo video trip is action shots. Historically, I've loved GoPros. I still rock a GoPro 7 Black. I've had it for over 5 years. It still works great. However, in the modern age, I think that 360 cameras with Insta360 is where it's at. So versatile. You can capture yourself perfectly with no one else around. And today my weapon of choice will be a skateboard. Alright, next up, the next tip is using neutral density filters, in my case a variable ND, to do long exposure shots. This is a really great way to stylize things that are otherwise kind of boring. You gotta have a little patience to do it right. I don't have too much time now, so here's a couple sample shots on screen. However, right place, right time, with the wispy, ghosty kind of effects. It's one of my favorite ways to do urban photography. And in this case, we're at Millennium Park in front of these statues here. I'm not too sure what they're called. They're kind of creepy. I find them to be a little bit disturbing. I'm not sure what the meaning behind this public installation is. Yeah, nonetheless, it's pretty neat, and you can get some cool reflective effects as well. Next, I want you to place yourself in my shoes. If you're already doing urban photo and video, I definitely recommend trying street photography. No, not the street, but rather the people. It's an interesting and often uncomfortable transition from shooting inanimate objects to shooting unsuspecting human subjects in frame. The organic interactions and moments of complete strangers captured are some that I'll never forget. While some will ignore your lens or express distaste in it, it is those that see what you're doing and fully relish in the spontaneous snapshot that really gives street photography its magic. Not all street photography has to be candid, some can be posed. Don't be afraid to politely ask people for their photo. Many will be happy to strike a pose for you on a whim. If you treat people with respect and dignity and you do not profit off their likeness without a signed photo release waiver, this is totally within your legal right to photograph and or film people in public. Record ambient music when you hear it. This is another awesome tip I'm going to give you. When you're walking the city streets in different places you travel, there's often going to be people on the street making their own music. And honestly, it rocks your travel video because one, it quite literally came from the location organically that you visited, as well as it doesn't cost you a dime to use that music and post it online, copyright free. Make sure to thank the musician for their time, and if you're gracious enough, throw them a couple bucks as a tip. They're out there working and hustling just as hard as you are. I guess you could say this view is pretty beans. Second time in Chicago, still under construction. This is easily the most famous piece of work in Chicago. It's really a shame, but hey, one day I'll get back and get to photograph it myself. Another must in the content creation game, you really gotta invest in a Manfrotto smooth head. Expensive, but super duper worth it. You need one of these to get smooth shots on a long lens. Using this handheld is not gonna do it for you, so you do need a smooth head tripod. It's the only way you could punch into, say, these kayakers, for example, on a nice smooth angle. You can never do that handheld. All right, so we're here in front of the Wrigley Building and Trump Tower. I know this is where some politically charged individuals might turn off the video. However, if you take anything from this video to artistically stylize your travel vids and photography, okay, sick skateboarder over there, better than me. Definitely give hyperlapses a try. What is a hyperlapse? A hyperlapse is a moving time lapse. It takes some time to perfect, but I'm gonna show an example in the video. If I have more time, probably could do a better one. Preferably, you want a wide lens so that you can warp, stabilize, and post to take out all the shake. And it's also lighter on the hands. Heavy tripod for 300 or 400 frames of you clapping it together. It's gonna get pretty heavy and you're gonna be burning in the shoulders and chest, like a little workout. So definitely go for the lighter lens. Possibilities are unlimited with this. This is one of my favorite techniques of all time. And next we're gonna show you some aerial hyperlapses as well. Out at North Avenue Beach, I'm going to show you another hyperlapse technique with the Mavic 2. Similar to the moving time lapse earlier, it's a little bit similar with the drone. The drone does most of the work. Drones are pretty common nowadays. Almost everyone has it in travel videography. You definitely need one to kind of complete the video. It gets you to vantage points you can't get any other way. And that's why I love using a lot of the DJI products for my travel work. Just behind us here, we're gonna fly it and take a look at some of the city. We're going to show on screen a bit of aerial time-lapse work. Rules and regulations, always keep your eyes on the craft. That way you don't lose it, you don't crash into a pedestrian, power line, etc. Safety first, and use your brain, common sense. You want to always be aware of where nearby aerodromes are. That's airports, heliports, etc. Stay out of their way, fly within the law. Above all, keep your eyes on the craft and make sure to use common sense. Since I love time lapses so much too, the last time lapse technique and probably the most advanced technique is a Ronin time lapse. So effectively, you have to calibrate the machine. You then need to figure out where it's going to move from point A to point B to finalize the lapse. And you need to figure out how many times does the intervalometer have to go off during that time. So we're gonna show you what the final product looks here. It's probably gonna be short because we're running out of daylight. It's break time before we do our final nighttime shots. I haven't eaten since 9 a.m. It's now 7 p.m. Cheers. All right, we're getting to the very end of the video. There's a few more things I want to show you. This is the night section of the video. Day or night, you still want to shoot while you travel, right? So first off, I'm going to show you how to do some long exposure camera work so that you can still get proper lighting at night, as well as for more advanced videographers, I'm going to show you how to use a Ronin stabilizer with a follow focus if you have one, investment if you don't have one, to get some really wicked shots even at nighttime. Let's go get it. So even for beginners in photography, as long as you understand the importance of using a tripod to keep the camera steady, as well as using a longer shutter speed to collect as much light on the sensor as possible, you can get pretty great night shots anywhere as long as there's some sort of light, i.e. in a city. That's gonna work for you. If you're out somewhere real dark, then it's not gonna work. But here's a few shots that I got at night just to show you what is still possible at night with a handheld camera on the tripod or even with a drone. Don't be afraid to crank your ISO just a bit. Avoid going over 800 because then you're gonna start to get quite a bit of grain. I left the Chicago theater till the end of the day because at night, that is when it really shines. And we're going to show how to use your camera to still capture this beautiful landmark even at night. For video shots at night, I would recommend not using handheld. You can use a smooth head tripod like we talked about earlier. That works great, but even better for more dynamic shots with more motion is to use a stabilizer like the Ronin-S. With this awesome tool, you can even get an added follow focus with a motor, which allows you to focus between the foreground and the background with ease with just your fingers without touching the camera. For video settings, I recommend using a newer mirrorless Canon or a Sony mirrorless camera. They tend to perform better in low light scenarios. You'll want to drop your aperture as low as 2.8 if possible. Match your shutter speed as low as it can go to match the frame rate. For example, if you're shooting 60 frames per second, you're going to want to have at least 120 for your shutter speed. However, I recommend dropping down to 30 frames per second or 24 and then doubling up your shutter speed from there to get the most light possible. Again, the same as photography at night, don't be afraid to crank your ISO just a bit, as high as about 800, because you don't want to flush out the blacks to the point where there's no data in the black pixels. It's alright to have a little bit of grain, you can work with that in post. You want to use the tools of ISO, shutter speed, and your aperture in optimal settings for nighttime. The more practice, the better with night shooting. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video and got a little bit of value as to how to start filming your own exciting travel videos, as well as making your travel photography just a little bit better. That's it. Last Minute Chicago. Thanks for watching. To end this trip off on a good note, open your eyeballs, take your headphones out, and talk to people. Be a human being. In 12 hours plus, I've met so many people today and linked them on Instagram and stuff just from having like the craziest little chats. It's a big old world out there, lots of people. You gotta love it.